come on in. Thank you. Today we are here for a program with Simeon Wright. And before I introduce our panel, I did want to just say that the program will end at 11:50. I know several of you have classes, and so we will end promptly at 11:50. Simeon Wright is a witness to history and did not know it perhaps at the time. He witnessed the abduction of his cousin Emmett Till in Tallahatchie County in 1955, and he has written a book to, I think in part to tell his story and to also set the record straight. Simeon's story, an eyewitness account of the kidnapping of Emmett Till, has appeared, and I know that several of you have it. I've seen it around the school this past week, and I know it has been a hot read, as it were. But I wanted to introduce our panel today to discuss the book and to discuss Simeon's life and to proceed. To my left to my immediate left is Bill Rose, who teaches journalism at Ole Miss, but for years covered the South with the Miami Herald. And he grew up in the same period in the Mississippi Delta. And also to my far left is W.C. Shoemaker, also known as Dub Shoemaker, veteran Mississippi journalist who covered the trial of Emmett Till for the Jackson Daily News. And in the center is Simeon Wright. And he will talk about what that moment was like, and we'll talk about his book and be open to your questions as well. This is a very special moment, and we're delighted to have Mr. Wright with us today. So I will begin by turning things over to Bill Rose, who will ask questions and start a dialogue.
Okay. Simeon, the Emmett Till case really helped to ignite the civil rights movement. Rosa Parks said that she was so moved that when she was on that bus and they asked her to move to the back of the bus, she couldn't do it because she thought of Emmett Till, and she realized she had to stay there and make a statement. James Baldwin heard about it in Europe and knew that he would have to come back and be involved in the struggle. It wasn't long before the SCLC was sending demonstrators to the South, and then the Freedom Riders came, and the South would never be the same. Did you think that the implications of Emmett Till's death could be so widespread at the time when it happened?
At the time it happened, I didn't realize it was spread all over the world. My wife, she lived in Belzoni. She said that when they heard about it, it just spread like wildfire. But as for me, it changed our attitude. Prior to that, there was no resistance. And my wife and I, we talk about it now. I said, do you remember seeing any white girls in Mississippi? No. We saw the boys, we didn't see the girls. But our attitude changed. We began to resist. I had the thought. I said, they're going to kill us anyway. We might as well resist. So the resistance started. That sparked us to stand up and say, hey, you're going to treat us like a human being.
What was it like that night in the house when John Malum and Roy Bryant came for Emmett Till? You were in the same bedroom, weren't you?
Yeah, in the same bedroom. My bedroom had 2 beds in it. I know some writers said that we lived in a cabin, but on page 56, there's a layout of the house that we lived in. It's 4 bedrooms, and they walked in the first bedroom first was Wheeler, my nephew, and my brother Maurice was there, and the awakened Wheeler said, and they said, this is the wrong boy. We're looking for the fat boy from Chicago. And when they arrived in my room, I was the first one to wake up, and J.W. Mylan, he was the guy I saw. I saw two men in my house, J.W. Mylan and Roy Bryant. Mylan had the pistol, and he ordered me to lay back down and go back to sleep. And he ordered my daddy to wake up him because it took him a long time to get him awakened. So he shaked him till he was awakened, and they began to ask him questions. And the bedroom was, first I didn't know what was going on until my mother came in there. And she was half talking, half crying, pleading with Roy Bryant and J.W. Mylan to leave Emmett alone, that they would pay them to just leave him alone. Roy Bryant hesitated, but J.W. Mylan, the mean guy, he didn't hesitate at all. He came there to, I guess, teach Emmett a lesson. And to describe the room, there's not enough words in the English language to describe that feeling. The grief, the fear, the anger, and how my mother was reacting to this. Even in reading the book, I got to that point I had to stop. I just can't describe it. It's a night I'll never forget. Yet I'm not bitter, but I'll never forget it.
Why aren't you bitter?
I found out, I guess at the age of 22, that hatred would kill you or get you killed. And what really changed me, I know a lot of people, they don't like to talk about it. They don't want people to talk about Jesus Christ and him crucified. But that's what changed me. At the age of 24, I was sitting in a tavern. I heard the voice. He said, if you die in your sins, you're going to hell. Because on weekends, like every weekend, I was fighting with someone. And there was a ritual. We knew that when the white boy back in those days started drinking, he couldn't help it. He had to say the N-word. We knew that. And we wouldn't bother them. We'd just wait until they do it. Then the fight would start. And I realized if I had to continue fighting like that, I would have been dead now.
This was in Chicago, right?
This is Chicago, suburb of Chicago. But by me committing my life to Christ, the anger left and forgiveness came. Forgiveness not easy. You can't do it overnight. It's hard to do, but I had to do it. And I'm glad I did it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today. Thinking about, when you invited me, I was thinking, I said, it took me 55 years to get my foot in the door at Ole Miss. I said, I'm here now. And I said, if someone would tell my dad that I was at Ole Miss, he probably would smile and rub his head. But my mother, there's something about mothers, my mother would believe it because she had a lot of confidence in her sons, and she wanted the best for us. But that night was the saddest night. You could cut the grief with a knife. I mentioned to someone the day after. I said, no one laughed that day. There was no laughter. But we survived it. We did what we could to bring these men to justice. The reporters, there was good reporters, there was bad reporters. We did what we could. The judge did what he could. Mr. Chapman did what he could.
Mr. Chapman was the prosecutor.
He was the prosecutor. I understand it upset him so bad that the stress was too much for him.
He died of a heart attack
Yes.
very few months afterward.
After that. That's how horrific the Emmett Till case is. And I can't get too deep in it because even at the age of, I'll be 68 Friday. And if I get too deep in it, I still break down. So I just want to.
I'm going to get to Dub in just a second, but I want to ask you first this will help explain what happened in the house in the context of the times. You were 12 years old.
12 years old, yes.
Emmett, also known as Bobo.
Bobo,
as y'all
yes.
called him.
That's all we knew at the time, Bobo.
He was 14.
14, yes.
And what happened at the house came after something that happened at the money store.
At Money Store.
A lot has been written about that. Some people have written that, and in fact, I think Carolyn Bryant testified at trial
At the trial, yes.
that what happened was that he walked in the store and he put his arm around her and tried to hold her hand and effectively propositioned her, asked her for a
Right.
date, and then left the store and whistled at her. Some of the newspapers called it a wolf whistle.
Wolf
What
whistle.
really happened? You were there.
Yes, I was there. I said if Carolyn Bryant told her husband that Emmett did that, then it's because he been killed. Some of you are going to be lawyers. I don't know what all happened before I got in there, but they tell me that any part of a testimony, if any part of it is a lie, the whole thing is a lie. She said that I came in the store and drug him out of there. That's a lie. That never happened. But this is what happened. I read the article that you all are reading that we got a break from the cotton field. We came up the money, and I said, you don't get no break out of no cotton field. We had picked cotton all day that day. Emmett was at home with my mom. And after we finished and after we had supper, we drove up the money. We was in money less than 20 minutes. My nephew Wheeler went into the Bryant store first. And Emmett went in behind him where Wheeler got out of there. I don't know whether he wanted to be in there with Emmett, because Emmett was a fun-loving guy. He just wanted to have fun. He just everybody felt like him. So my brother Maury sent me in right away to go in behind and make sure that he didn't say anything out of line. While I was in the store, he said nothing to Carolyn Bryant. We left the store together. And after we got outside the door there, Carolyn Bryant came out behind us, walking towards the car, and Emmett whistled at her. It scared us half to death. Some said, why did he do it? I said, I think he just wanted us to laugh. He wasn't trying to be fresh. He just wanted to let the boys in Mississippi know, hey, I'm from Chicago, I can do this, I'm not afraid. He had no idea what was going to happen to him. He saw our reaction, it scared him. And we got out of town as fast as we could. And before we got home, he begged us not to tell Daddy what happened. Now, I've read, and you have read. You have seen, many of you have seen Eyes on the Prize. You've seen my nephew talking about what happened at the store. There's been one thing wrong. My nephew wasn't there. He's telling the story, he wasn't there. There was no picture of any white girlfriend, no such thing. We just went to the store. He went in to buy some items. He whistled at Carolyn Bryant. He did whistle, and for that. But if Carolyn Bryant told her husband what she said in the courtroom, that is enough to enrage them. You have to get to her and ask her, did she really tell her husband what she said in the courtroom? But Emmett whistled. And that's not
I think she's in a nursing home today, at least.
I haven't.
So.
I just heard recently that one of her sons that she lived with had passed away. I didn't know anything about that. But that's what happened at the store. He whistled at Carolyn Bryant. And for that, he paid for it with his life.
And they came for Bobo 2 or 3 days later, as I recall.
Exactly. It happened, we was at the store on a Wednesday night, and they came that Sunday morning about 2 a.m. We had been to Greenwood that Saturday night. You know, if you're a cotton picker, most of you all know anything about picking cotton. I can look at you and tell. But if you're a cotton picker, if you go to Greenwood on a Saturday night, it was something like a relief valve. You could have 6 months worth of fun in one night. That's what Greenwood was like to us. And we had been to Greenwood that night, and we left coming home at 12 midnight. And about 2 a.m., that's when they entered my home.
Now, did y'all tell your father, Mose Wright, who testified at the trial and pointed out John Malum, did y'all tell him what had happened at the store?
No. Emmett begged us not to tell, and we didn't tell. Now, later on, I was reading his testimony. He said he had heard there was some talk up there, but we didn't tell it. He must have heard it from my neighbor, because his son, they was a little different than they was so afraid. We were never afraid of white people. Why? They play with us. They didn't have anybody else to play with. Everybody else was afraid to play with them. So we play with the boys. until they want to go snake hunting. So you got to be out of your mind. But, but I don't know. They call us the little bad right boy. I guess that's why. But we played with anybody. We didn't care. And so someone, if our neighbor, Mr. Crawford, may have told Dad, but we never talked about it. Never told
Do
him.
you think if you had told him, things might have worked differently?
I think if we had told him exactly what he had done, I think Dad would have got him out of there, because he knew the mores of the South and the system better than I did. I was just 12 years old. I'm just a cowboy. I see cowboys, the bad man get arrested and he go to jail. That's what I'm thinking is going to happen to these guys. But it never happened.
Deb, you were at the trial where justice did not take place. In fact, you did some reporting that was kind of contributed to what happened in terms of the prosecution. What happened over there in Mound Bayou? Y'all got a tip before the trial.
Yeah. The Daily News, which was the afternoon paper in Jackson at that time, sent two people to the trial. Jim Featherston was the senior reporter. I'll take a second. Jim participated in 2 Pulitzer Prizes, once in the early 1950s in Vicksburg for the coverage of a tornado that killed 40-something children in a movie house. And later, after this, in the Kennedy assassination, he worked for the Dallas Times-Herald, and they won a Pulitzer for the Kennedy coverage. Featherston was actually in the room when Ruby killed Oswald, and saw it, watched it. But he was the lead reporter. He did the actual trial coverage. I did the sidebar type stuff and that sort of thing. I was the younger person, if you can believe that, at that time. We were staying at I'll take this a second. You're talking about at the beginning of the civil rights movement. It very clearly was. It caught so much national attention and even a little international attention. There's a massive number of reporters there. And of course, Sumner, and it's interesting, there's a story of how it happened to be held in Sumner instead of in Greenwood also. I shouldn't use happened, but how it was held in Sumner. The reporters were, I don't know how many, there were probably 100 reporters from all sorts of publications all over the country. A very interesting one worked for the Communist Daily Worker in New York. His daddy was a Baptist preacher in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. That's what he told me anyway. And I saw his stories, and they were straight. What happened? Anyway, Jim Featherston and I were staying at the Alcazar Hotel. We were sharing a room in Clarksdale. He called down to Mound Bayou, which everybody know where Mound Bayou is? At that time, it was no white folks lived there, all African Americans. And they called the town hall just to see what was going on one night about 10 o'clock. And they put Dr. T.R.M. Howard, who was later became quite controversial, who was the town doctor, on the phone. And he suggested we come down to Mound Bayou then. They wanted to talk with us. And they asked us to ask Featherston, he told me this, I only heard his side of the conversation, to bring Clark Porteous from the Memphis Press-Scimitar, which was the afternoon newspaper in Memphis, with us. So we did, and we went down, and there was about 8 or 10 all black folks around the table in the conference room there. And they told us that Dr. Howard did the talking, that they had a witness, and they knew his name only as Chicken Willie. They didn't know his last name. And they wanted the trial delayed while they could go out and find him. So somehow I got the duty to go get the trial delayed. Next morning early, I went down to Sumner and rousted up a highway patrol investigator named Gwen Cole, C-O-L-E, told him about it. We went to the special prosecutor who was there and the district attorney and told them. Then we all went to the circuit judge, Curtis Swango, and told him. And I repeated what I'd been asked to do. They delayed the trial for half a day, the judge did, And they went out in the fields and they found Chicken Willie. His name was Willie Reed. He testified at the trial. You may know him.
Yes.
And he told what he saw, but then the jury wasn't out long and didn't change. But it was there's some interesting things about it. The Money, Mississippi is in LaFleur County, which is not in that district. Sumner is in Tallahatchie County. It's one of the 2 county seats in Tallahatchie County. As time went along, when they found the Till's body, it had been thrown in the Tallahatchie River and tied down with a fan out of a cotton gin to make it sink. And they claimed it was in Tallahatchie County, but you had 2 very different types of law enforcement in the 2 counties. Greenwood was more level-headed, and Tallahatchie was the leadership there, at the courthouse leadership, was a little bit more, had a reputation of being a little more biased into the times. But what it did, although they freed him, then 3 months later, a freelance writer who was my, I can't say friend, but was an acquaintance, William Bradford Huey from Montgomery, Alabama, went to Till and Bryant, met with them at their lawyer's office in Sumner, and got them to tell him what happened. And he wrote it for Look magazine, and Look published it, in which they confessed the killing. He had told me he paid them $3,000, and he said they left the lawyer's office, and he remembered, and he said he walked outside and shouted for them to come back, and they came back in the office, and he said he wrote them a denial, because he said, you guys are going to live in this darned, except he didn't say darned, Delta, so you better deny this. And they did, but they threatened to sue him and Look or whatever. Of course, nothing ever happened. Huey was a kind of a controversial writer. He, if y'all remember the Neshoba County killings in 1964, he was the middleman. He took the FBI's reward money and met some men, and he wouldn't tell me who, in Memphis, and paid. He told me he paid $20,000 of FBI money to get some directions on how to find those bodies in Neshoba County. What he didn't tell me was, the FBI leader told me, they gave him $30,000. I asked him later, I called him on the phone in Alabama, what you gonna do with my other $10,000? And he hung up on me pretty much. He never did. But I'm wondering here, the trial was really created it put the black-white fuss on the front of everything. Mississippi was, and I'll shut up in just a second. We were in the basically white leadership was divided very much, and this continued as years to come. At the time, over how to react to the rising racial issue. There was a group of people, and I think today, and I thought then, the majority of Mississippians did not think we ought to have a racial fight. Among the leaders in that thinking was J.P. Coleman, who was later governor, later a federal judge on the Fifth Circuit. At that time, he was Attorney General, but he was in the last days of a campaign to become governor. He sent a special prosecutor to Sumner to prosecute these 2 men. You told me his name, I've forgotten it.
Yeah, it was Robert. Thank you.
Who?
Robert Smith.
Yeah. Your father? Oh, was he? He was taller than you. I remember that. But it was a very it really set off. I spent about 10, 12 years covering probably 50% of my time covering the civil rights movement in the South. And I do some programs, and I talk about the 4 significant times in the history of this country: the American Revolution, the Civil War, the Industrial Revolution, where we came up with a steam engine and learned to use machines, and then what I call the Social Revolution that changed lifestyles. And this really set off, was a major step in our part of the world that got the civil rights fight out front. And not only was it a bad thing, of course, all crime is bad, and this was bad. It was a significant thing in what it set forth. Now, what happened that day, I've heard two versions of what happened in that store at Sumner. I've heard what the store at Money. I've heard that the wolf whistle, which was widely published. Then I did not talk to Ms. Bryant, but folks who talked with her claimed that this boy, this teenager, made a pretty mean remark about bragging about his relationship with white women in Chicago, and he was available, and she threw him out, told him to leave. That's what other folks have said. I don't have any idea. I wasn't there. I did go last year. Last few months I was over in the Delta, and I got real curious. I hadn't been there in a long time, and I took the back road and went to, you can't go through Sumner because you're through it by the time you get there. I mean, through Money. But the old store was still standing. Yeah. It hadn't been used in years and years, but it was still standing there.
Barely, but it's still there.
Barely, yeah.
Boarded up.
I'll answer a question if you want me to.
You know, you talked about Robert Smith and Gerald Chatham was the DA. What was the family's feeling about the job that they did? I heard they thought they did a really good, made a strong attempt to get a conviction.
Well, Mr. Chatham, he did. He did what he could, and Daddy was pleased with his action. You know, I found out later I was the only one in the courtroom
Mercy.
that felt we was going to get a conviction. And I found out later my dad said it went about like he thought it would.
Yeah.
But being 12 years of age, we're eyewitnesses.
Now, Mose, your father, Mose Wright,
Yeah, yes.
was a minister,
He was minister.
and he stood up in the courtroom, a black man standing up in the courtroom and pointing out a white man in Mississippi at the time. Dub, how rare was that?
Very.
Unheard of.
Swango, I had the impression, I didn't hear the whole trial, I heard parts of it because I was outside part of it in my job. But the judge had he had a pretty level-headed reputation, and I think that all the people, I never heard anybody accuse him of being biased in his handling of the trial, that it was a fair trial. My thoughts, historically, is that no matter what the evidence was, the verdict would have been the same, because it wasn't a matter of the issues. It was just a matter of the people who heard the trial. The jury was 12 white men chosen from Tallahatchie County, and there was enough bias among us to that would I don't think you could have gotten a conviction. Later years, I covered the trial of Byron Daley Beckwith, two trials of the murder of Medgar Evers, and there's very little, very small amount of evidence in that trial, and the jury could not agree. I think some of the jurors would have convicted him because they felt like he did it, but the only evidence they had was a left thumbprint off the telescopic side of the rifle. And the police investigator said it was a fresh thumbprint. The FBI, the defense brought in the FBI crime lab experts from Washington, and they said fingerprints don't age. He could have been 5 years old. And the jury twice could not agree. So that was 7 years later. 8 years later, 7 years later, 62. So 8 years later, 63. But the Till case, no doubt, set forth the civil rights movement. You mentioned the Freedom Riders. They came in '61. That was all a follow-up to that. Of course, we had some other violence. We had a man in Belzona was murdered, two folks down in the Natchez area, but never anything that got the national attention as did the Emmett Till case. And it really set it off.
Now, during the trial, there was a famous thing, I think Eyes on the Prize mentioned it, and I think it's been written up in various things, that when Mose Wright stood up and pointed to the man that came to the house, he said, "Thar he."
Mm-hmm.
Is that the way Mose Wright spoke?
No.
What did he say?
He stood up and said, "There he is."
There he is.
And the reporter that did that, he died before I could get to him. He happened to be African American. This is the same guy that said he helped my dad escape Mississippi in a coffin. So I asked the question, I said, how did his sons get out? I mean, he wanted 15 minutes of fame, and he put that out there. It's in history, and I'm trying to correct it. And I dealt with it in the book. And you're speaking about the trial. The verdict was unjust. The men committed this murder. They didn't pay for it. But guess who's paying? The state of Mississippi had to pay. That's not fair. That's not fair. It's not fair to you. So if you ever get on a jury, if the evidence is there, regardless of what color the person is, do the right thing. If they had done the right thing back in 1955, we would have forgotten about Emmett by now. But the verdict enraged everybody. We got mail from Japan, we got mail from Russia. Just because of 12 men wouldn't do the right thing. Isn't that something?
Now, what happened after the trial? Y'all left to go to Chicago, right?
The verdict, after the verdict, you know, looking back at the people rejoicing. One lady said God was in the verdict. I was on the radio, said God was in the plan. I said God wasn't on the jury. They was rejoicing. I look back, guess what? The thought of a 12-year-old. I said we had no one to help us, not even the sheriff. He testified for the defense. Who ever heard of such a thing?
One of the linchpins of the defense was that the state never proved the body was Emmett Till. And they claimed, no, Emmett's up north somewhere hiding, and this is just something that's being done by the NAACP.
Exactly.
But years later, the FBI, Justice Department reopened the case.
Reopened the case.
Just within the last 10 years, as I recall.
It's 2005.
And as part of that investigation, they exhumed Emmett's body.
They exhumed the body, yes.
Were you there for that?
I was there for that.
What was that like for you?
Well, we had helicopters all over the news, you know, because the news wasn't allowed. But I had one reporter. Somehow he had befriended me, and I allowed him to ride in my car. And the sheriff stopped him and said, "Where are you going?" I didn't know the sheriff knew the guy. And it was, everybody wanted to get their hands on that story, what it was like. My family members, some of them didn't even want it to happen. One of them they got a couple of civil rights leaders try to stop it. I said, "You can't stop it. She's not next of kin." I said, "It's only 9 of us, and 6 of them my brothers and sisters." So we went ahead, we did the exhumation, we did the DNA test, proving to the state of Mississippi that the body that's buried in Burr Oak is Emmett Till. But that was the defense back in 1955, that this is not Emmett, it's somebody else. But that's why we had to exhume his body, because the state of Mississippi said, unless you prove to us there's Emmett out there in Burr Oak, we will not reopen this case. And that's why we had to do it.
Not many people know it, but Mose Wright that was not the first act of courage in which he had stood up to the society around him.
Oh, no.
He was he refused to be drafted in World War I.
World War I. He was a minister, Church of God in Christ at Kojic, and they just didn't believe in brothers should kill brothers. And Bishop Mason from Lexington, Mississippi, was the first to go to jail. And my dad said, "I'm not going." He refused to sign up, and they arrested him, and he spent 30 days in jail. But the sheriff told him, said, "Mose, we can't make you fight, but we can make you serve." And they let him go. So he, even when they was trying to get my dad not to testify, because during the time, my mother left that house that same night. It was 30 days before I could see my mother again. Could you imagine that? Going through all of that, and mama's not home? I heard a song once, when things go wrong, I just said, "Mama, sing a song." But she wasn't there. They're begging my daddy, "Please, these men's gonna kill you." So daddy said this. He said, "I know one thing. I know I'm gonna testify. Whether I live, I don't know." And from that, we prepared for the trial without mama.
Dub, the witness that y'all helped find, Highway Patrol went out and got them before the trial. What were they able to testify to?
I don't really know.
They read. Do you
I don't know. I didn't go on the hunt to find him. I was doing so. I went and met with the judge and the prosecutors to tell them what they wanted. But I got done doing something else in the afternoon. They found him later that day, that morning, out in, I'm told, in a cotton field.
Yeah.
And he was kind of hiding behind the cotton patch. But I don't know what his testimony was. I never did. If I once knew, I don't remember. My old age has gotten me.
I've been in his presence.
Have you?
Yes. Oh, yes. I know
Willie
him.
Reed?
I know him personally. It's not Willie Reed anymore. You wouldn't find him as Willie Reed. After he testified, he had to change his name. And
Oh, really?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
He lives in Chicago, and even when Mamie passed away, the hospital that they took her to, he worked there. But he testified to, he heard the screaming in this barn, and he saw a Marlin's truck drive up, and on the back of the truck, he saw 4 African Americans back there. He saw J.W. Marlin. He see, I guess Roy Bryant was somewhere else, but that's what his testimony. He did see them. He heard the screaming. He and Mandy Bradley, and he saw it. Well, this is the way he phrased it. He said, "I saw a boy on the back of the truck that looked like Emmett Till." So that was his testimony. But he lives in Chicago. It's not Willie Reed. You won't find him as that. You go on the internet, I don't know if you want me to give you his last name or not, but
I don't need it.
he had a nervous breakdown after his testimony. He was so scared. He was so scared. So that's how, I know you young people just can't fathom in your mind. I talk to high school kids, and the first thing I tell them, I said, they tell me that the Civil War took place in America. I said, that is hard to fathom, but it did. It might be hard for you to fathom that this happened in America, but it did. But you all gonna become good lawyers, good doctors. You're gonna bring about a change. You're gonna be fair to everybody, aren't you? Sure you are.
Hopefully good journalists, too.
Good job. Oh, tell the truth. Be like George Wills. I love him. Most people don't like him. They say he's a conservative, but he tell it like it is. Young lady, tell it like it is and run before you take it back. All right? Would you do that for me? Good.
Do you remember they were when Emmett's body was found and pulled out of the river, and your father went over to identify him,
Right.
identify the body. They prepared to bury it in Mississippi,
Money, Mississippi.
and y'all went out actually to the cemetery.
The grave was dug.
And what happened?
First, Uncle Crosby, he lived in Sumner, and he worked for Mr. McFall. And he came and said, I don't think his grandmother want the boy buried there. And Daddy kind of hesitated. Then by that time, Sheriff George Smith drove up and said,
From LaFleur County.
From LaFleur County. He said, there will be no barrier here today. And the undertaker from Tallahassee County said, well, they told me to bury this boy here. He said, I'm sheriff in Leaflore County. And he jumped in his car and sped off, and that stopped it. They shipped the body, took the body back to Greenwood and prepared it to send it to Chicago.
And in Chicago, there was a huge funeral service.
Huge funeral service.
Did you go? Were you there?
No, we had to stay and prepare for the trial. I think jury selection took place the day that the trial was held. The burial was taking place in Chicago. And my mother, you know, she left, and when the body was found, she traveled to Chicago on the same train with Emmett's body. She was able to attend his funeral.
You know, in Tallahatchie County today, there's an Emmett Till Commission.
Right.
And they issued a statement of apology, regret, whatever you want to call it.
Well, it wasn't really an apology. If you read between the lines, you journalists know the difference between an apology and how they whitewashed it. What the sheriff said, I wasn't there. I know you wasn't there. What? But they did what they could. Mm-hmm. But no one ever apologized for the verdict of the jury. I believe that if the state of Mississippi would just come out and say, the jurors was wrong, I think that'll change a whole lot of stuff all over the world. Because I think that a lot of manufacturers refuse to relocate to Mississippi because of that. But I believe that would open up things.
Now, they're also trying to create an Emmett Till Museum in Sumner. They have a smaller one in Glendora already. You know, do you think, is the family pleased by that?
Some are. I'm not too, because I think about the bad things that happen there. I can't figure out what they're trying to do. Is it to get tourism there for monetary gains or what? I've never been out for monetary gains. I just, because of my wife, my wife is the one that got me to talking, because I refuse to talk about it. Because I said, I had heard so many lies. I said, they want to believe a lie, let them believe it. Then she encouraged me to tell the truth about it.
This is probably not a nice question, but tell us about Emmett Till's father. He had died, hadn't he?
Emmett Till's father, he was kind of on the, see, my sister at age 9 was raised by Mamie's mother. So she knew all the details, and I think he was kind of rowdy, and he didn't volunteer for the Army. He was given a choice. Go to the Army or go to jail, because he was a wife abuser. So he had to either go to jail for abusing his wife or go to the Army. And he went to the Army. In the Army, he was accused of raping, I believe, an Italian woman. Now, this is what we received. There was nothing on the telegram. Only thing on the telegram was he was executed for willful cause, or something to that effect. Now, the man that married Louis Till's widow was in the same outfit with him. And he said that Louis Till was killed because he was going with the same woman as the lieutenant. That's what he said. But as far as the Army, they really didn't give him the reason why he was executed. But he was executed in the Army. The order was given by Eisenhower, General Eisenhower, to put him to death.
White woman?
Italian. I don't know if they have any black Italians.
I don't either.
I never
Maybe-
met one.
maybe half and half.
I never met one.
I don't know either.
I wonder, yeah.
I have a question for Wright. And
Yes, sir.
weigh in if you want to. But I feel your pain. And you said you couldn't get too deep into it without, bringing up that memory that night. But there are millions of other people who are alive today, some younger than you, like Ben Cheney,
Right.
and many others of children.
Mm-hmm.
And they're suffering the trauma of that period. Do you have any idea as to what it's going to take to heal the damage done by that kind of trauma, by living under that kind of trauma and experiencing what you experienced? What would it take? Because like you said, Christianity, you gave your life to Jesus, but that hadn't done it because you still can't talk about it. So what is it going to take to heal the pain?
I think if the more I talk, the more the healing comes. The group Sojourn to the Past, it's a high school, juniors and seniors out of California. The more I talk to them, the more I'm able to open up about what happened. And I think that's the best therapy there is to continue to talk. I remember Eckford, one of the Little Rock Nines, she had a nervous breakdown and her life was just been destroyed. And she began to talk to these high school kids. And she began to open up. Now she's not truant officer, she's a parole officer in Little Rock, Arkansas, whereas her life was being destroyed. But as she began to talk about it and began to open up, the healing process take place. And the thing I stumbled on is when my mother left. I stumbled on that. My sister said, "Aren't you over that?" I said, "Oh, no. You don't get over that. You endure that. I don't enjoy it, I just endure it. I'm not sure I want to get over that." Mothers, don't leave your children. Take them with you. Maybe because I'm the youngest of 12, I don't know. But there's one thing about the 12 of us. Out of 12 children, 11 of us lived to draw a pension. The driver of the car that night, he couldn't shake it. He died young, 54 years of age. So I believe if he had talked about it more, he would have gotten over it. So I would suggest any one of you been through any kind of trauma like this, talk to someone about it. My wife said we should have talked to a psychiatrist. We never heard tell of a psychiatrist in Mississippi in 1955. At least I had. So I'm thinking that's what it's going to take. For me, it took Jesus Christ and him crucified and my ability to begin to talk to the young kids. They promised me they're going to become good lawyers, good doctors, good writers. And they was going to help their fellow man, because there's some more Emmets out there. Somebody got to help them.
Oftentimes, court cases set precedents. Once a precedent is set in the court case, they use that for the rest of the cases. Do you feel that Emmett's case is a very important precedent and injustice, a paragon of injustice, if you will, that we can learn from and look at for the rest of the time and say it can never be that bad ever again? Do you ever kind of look at Emmett as a martyr, if you will, for justice and civil rights in Mississippi and the South and America?
I look at the whole incident, Emmett, his death, as his mother said, a sacrificial lamb. I look at my father when he had a choice to either testify or not. All of these things are precedent. Whoever heard tell of a black man testifying against a white man in Mississippi and lived to tell about it? I had never heard of that. So in that sense, it set a precedent that we're going to testify, you do us wrong, we're going to tell it, whether you kill us or not. And it's something that you can look back on and say they did it then. And young man, it's something that you can say it would never happen again in my state. You can do it. My generation is not going to do it. It's something about, I don't know, but you can do it.
Yes.
First off, with the documentary Oscar Prize, why do you think your nephew would tell the researchers false information? And secondly, was Miss Bryant at the house? Did she come to the house to identify Emmett? Because they went to the wrong room first, and then the guys weren't there, so they came to your room second. Was she there to tell them which guy Emmett was?
Well, when my nephew Curtis was confronted about this, he said he got caught up in the story and repeated what he heard. That's why he did it. But when Emmett was taken out to the truck, my dad said there was a woman's voice responding when they asked the question, "Is this the right boy?" And the woman's voice said, "He is." To this day, I believe it was Carolyn Bryant, and to this day, she has never denied it. most of the landowners are in that area, they talked to my dad. They said, Mose, we never would have done anything like that. Everybody was devastated. It was just a handful of evil people, and the good people was afraid to confront them. I think if the good people had stood up, something would have been done, but they were afraid. Just like today, you might see something that's wrong, you might be afraid. I was in Frisco, a young black boy messing with a white girl. I'm looking, I said, why don't someone stop him? No one said anything. Till I felt Mose Wright rise up in me. I said, boy, leave that girl alone. Oh, he cursed me up and down. From the streets of Chicago, no, once they start cursing, they're not going to do anything. The next time I saw him, the police had him. So we could not get to where we are now without good white people. It's totally impossible. You know why? They have all the jobs. Oh, yes, they have the jobs. But they were afraid. But you're not going to be afraid. You're going to be like the young man in college in Alabama when they bombed that church in Alabama. He was sitting there. It shook him so much that he did something about it. He graduated law school, went back to Birmingham, became the attorney general, and he arrested those men and convicted them and sent them to jail. Isn't that something? You can do the same. Would you do it for me? Don't do it for me, do it for Mississippi. This is home. Something like Tobacco Road. You ever hear that song, Tobacco Road? You're dirty and you're filthy. I despise you because of that, because of what happened, but I love you because you're home.
Thank you very much.
That was great.
Thank you.
That was great.
It's been a pleasure, sir.
Thank you.